Welcome back, everyone. I'm Nathurow, and I'm back on the scene with another video. Texas versus California? Military? Come on now. Texas wins. We don't need to watch the video. Okay, I'm kidding. Here are my real thoughts. California has 10 million more people than Texas. I believe California has a population around 39 to 40 million, and Texas has 29 to 30 million. California does have also a bigger economy, but Texas does have a lot more guns per capita for people, which I guess could prove useful if you're building up like some militias. Like, let's say that the Texas military starts recruiting people, and if they already have, you know, a pretty strong gun with them, I guess that could prove useful. But I mean, there's just so much to consider. But anyway, wow, this ought to be interesting. Let's see what he does.
One morning, the people of
Houston, Texas
receive urgent news. Their state is at war with California, and for some reason, the rest of the US does not interfere. What strange times.
Yeah, what strange times. The rest of the country's like, you know what, let's just see how this plays out. Let's just bust out the popcorn. It's gonna be a big one. Right.
In this fantastical scenario, the people residing in both states become fiercely loyal to said states. The US states in between are freely passable for both belligerents.
Wow.
Both states use any US military units available in their territory.
Okay.
Texas is the biggest continental US state, while California is the most populous state. Which would win this fight?
Right. So, just in reality, when he said other states are gonna stay out of it, and of course, like, it's freely passable, obviously that just would not happen. I mean, if something like this were to happen, again, technically, I'm pretty sure like surrounding states would form like alliances and stuff, which, I mean, that could be another video. I don't know if he's made something like that. Maybe he has already. If he has, you know, I might take a look at it. But anyway, let's go.
Texas and California would play a crucial role in any war within the US, and you can simulate this internal conflict in Conflict of Nations, sponsoring this video. It's a free-to-play real-time online strategy, and they just added a special 32-player mode called Battlegrounds USA. You play on a map of North America, so you can indeed start in Texas and conquer California. Binkov viewers will be the first ones to try it out via the link given below the video. Of course, the base Conflict of Nations mode still has the big world war. Be one of the 64 players who leads their country and conquers the entire world. And do it all either on mobile devices or on a PC. New players will get a special gift. Click on the link below to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription
states attacking each other and...
Back to our hypothetical war. California has two things going for it. If it comes to total mobilization, it can draft 35% more soldiers out of its population, in theory. Its gross state product is also bigger by 70%.
Yep.
Both economies are really huge, comparable to the GDP of some of the world's top 10 economies.
Look at that. That is, I mean, if you really put that into perspective, that is insane. Both in the top 10 if they were separate countries, yet California is still 5 whole spaces ahead of Texas, so we'll see.
But in this kind of a war, there would be many other factors at play as well. Just what sort of military forces are there in each state? California has many active duty service members. Texan numbers are a bit lower, but a lot of the Californian figures are sailors and airmen, as the US Navy's Pacific Fleet is, for the great part, based in California. US Army soldiers are fairly low in numbers. Various reservists and guardsmen are plentiful and comparable for both sides. The minimum distance between the two sides is some 490 miles, but for the most bases the actual distance would be easily over 700 miles.
So that bit about the Navy, that 100% makes sense, because even though both states, they have their own coast, California is right off the Pacific, so it faces, you know, potential hostile forces, to whereas with Texas they'd have to like sail you know, past Florida into the Gulf of Mexico if a foreign invader really wanted to sail towards, like, you know, towards Texas. And also like California, I mean, Hollywood's based there. There's a bunch of like tech company giants based there. So I mean, both states have a lot to protect, but I mean, the fact that all that stuff for California is facing like the Pacific outright, like I think that's a little bit more vulnerable. But anyway, yeah, let's go.
In some instances, over 1,300 miles. Both sides' ground force formations would take some weeks to assemble if they are to push towards each other. Before that, smaller skirmishes by rapidly deployed smaller force units would be likely. California has more airlift assets inside its territory. Not so much when it comes to airplanes, but definitely more when it comes to rotary assets, courtesy of housing the 1 out of 3 total US Marine Corps divisions. All in all, California should have almost 200 helicopters and Ospreys, especially when the US Navy utility helicopter fleet is included. Texas would have to rely on a few dozen helicopters. Of course, these figures do not include various other government agency helicopters, nor private assets. So California might be able to send in some of its marine units forward to take high-up positions on mountains and to take control of roads and railroads in eastern New Mexico. Texas would be able to mostly circumvent New Mexico, or at least its highly populated areas, going south of the mountains. Californian forces would rush into Arizona through the more approachable southern regions, though Phoenix and Tucson would be pretty much in the way. The first large-scale ground battles might be expected roughly near the New Mexico and Arizona border, though Texas might be heavily attacking the Californian forward positions around the mountains here as well. California has that whole division of Marines, so in terms of actual grunts on the ground, it has an upper hand.
Oh wow. Okay, so I'm glad he somewhat showed like the landscape, and I was gonna mention that, man, they're basically fighting like in a pretty rugged desert terrain, which can be, I mean, really brutal, like depending on, I guess, what time of year you invade in. If it's the summer, dear God, oh man, you're gonna have people from both sides just melting. Let's keep going.
Almost 3 times as many pure infantrymen, but it lacks heavy support units, as Texas has 3 times as many heavy armored units with tanks. A similar ratio favoring Texas exists with regards to various armored recon units. Finally, direct fire support is also on the Texan side. California has just under half the artillery units Texas does.
Artillery.
When it comes to attack helicopters, California has the Marines' 6 attack helicopter squadrons, while Texas relies on the Army's 7 combat helicopter battalions. Marine helicopter units are mixed with AH-1 attack helicopters and armed utility UH-1s, while the Army's units have the heavier Apache attack helicopters. The helicopter edge and the more numerous ground recon units might provide for some recon edge, but California houses a much more robust heavy aerial drone fleet, including very long-range Global Hawk and even U-2 recon units. Given that Texas would not be able to control the air, it is California that would be effectively monitoring the situation from the air, from afar. Texas would be unlikely to mount large offensives that would go unnoticed beforehand, and would likely be partially suppressed by California's air power edge, and then carefully met with the infantry, choosing the best locations to try and hold against the Texan advantage in heavy armor and firepower. California would have a lot of neutral territory to use for strategic retreats, if it wanted to play defensively. Retreating over neutral territory might basically be luring Texas into a less favorable position. With each such move, the Texan offensive would entail even longer logistics lines.
I think a lot of this depends on who is more of the aggressor and who plays more defensively. If California sends in their like their air assets, since they have an edge over that, it's possible that the Texas military would I mean, like they may know that they have the advantage over that, so they'll like take precautions and maybe just focus on defense at the beginning. until they kind of see what California does with their air assets, I would think. But allowing your enemy to kind of like just automatically take the mountains in New Mexico, that wouldn't really be a good thing either. Because also the west part of Texas is basically just one giant dust bowl. I mean, like the terrain is super flat. That could be, I guess, a good thing if you're Texas and you need to rush, troops to the border. But at the same time, it's like if California takes those mountains, then they have like a pretty big swath of just flat land to kind of rush things in. That can be bad. I mean, assuming that they're even able to get their ground forces over there. So, yeah, this is I don't know. This is interesting. Well, let's keep going.
Even more exposed to California's air power edge. If Texas would take that bait,
edge,
by the time the Californian border would be reached, Texan firepower and armor edge would be all but negated, with Texas suffering more casualties to get to that point on the map. Actually pushing into California would incur even greater casualties and would not achieve anything but accelerate defeat. Which is all why Texas would likely be content to stay where it is and not even venture out of its positions in New Mexico.
There you go. So, like I said, more of a defensive stance. And it's one of those things like that mountain range in New Mexico would probably be pretty important. If you were actually successful in taking them, then, well, I mean, at least what I would do is secure the mountain range first, maybe build like a makeshift base in that area if you can, and then from there, maybe start launching an assault. Don't just like, if you advance and take a position, don't just keep on going without, first fortifying what you've taken over, So, yeah, I agree that this defensive thing, more of a defensive position, and then like slowly advancing forward like by increments, that would definitely be the way to go if you're Texas and you have disadvantages in certain areas. So,
but in doing that, it might still find itself on the losing side eventually, as the Californian air power and naval power slowly nibbles away at its strategic infrastructure,
yeah,
its
it would
ports,
suck.
oil rigs, various military bases, etc. While neither side has many US Air Force units, California has many more Marine Corps and Navy aircraft units. California outnumbers Texas 5-1 in Marine Corps squadrons. But perhaps more crucially, California is home to 4 of the Navy's carrier air wings. Texas houses 1 Navy training wing on paper, but its actual units are dispersed outside the state. In total, California would have some 4 times as many tactical fighter jets.
That's
as
a big
Texas.
difference.
That's not counting the Growler electronic warfare squadrons, adding a few dozen more planes. Those would be quite important fighting the Texan air defenses. That's one area where Texas has a definite upper hand, with 8 air defense battalions, against California's 0. The only long-reach air defenses California could count on would be ones of the US Navy ships. But that means anything that's not close to the ocean would simply not be protected, which is most of California and the entire battleground of the in-between US states. Californian Growlers would keep track of Texan air defenses, so even the Patriot SAM's range might not allow for too many ambushes. E-2 aerial early warning planes would also come in handy over New Mexico, keeping track of incoming Texan fighter interceptions. California could decide to send its naval fleet around and park its ships, carriers and subs in the Mexican Gulf, but it's questionable if that would be worth it, if the goal is to land troops. Then again, several long-range air defense destroyers on rotation would be more useful at least for a blockade in the Gulf of Mexico rather than not doing anything in the Eastern Pacific. Carriers are not meant to go through the Panama Canal, even if politics allowed it. Going all the way around South America would be a huge trip. Sustaining a multi-carrier fleet so far away would be very taxing.
Yeah, that would also be a very huge logistical question, and it's kind of something that I thought about at the beginning. Is the Panama Canal going to be accessible or not? I would say if countries are being neutral and staying out of conflict, I would say no. I think it'd probably be shut down, which means if they would have to make that trek completely around South America, shit. Who knows if it would be worth it, but maybe eventually it could be fruitful. I don't know.
and planes have lower sortie rates when operating from carriers. So it would really make much more sense to use those Navy planes and operate them from the ground bases. At best, one carrier with its air group might be kept on station somewhere far away from Texas, but still in the Gulf, to help protect the more forward-positioned ships and subs that would wreak havoc on the Texan coastal economy and the offshore oil platforms. With such a huge part of the US Navy's fleet being in California's hands, a lot of its cruise missiles would also be in California, possibly upward of 1,500 out of 4,000 or so Tomahawks that the US Navy has. And for using those, California would not even need to send vessels anywhere. Tomahawk's ample range would allow firing them from the Californian coast and still reaching most of Texas. Texas would have some aces up its sleeve though. It houses B-1B bomber units, a few dozen planes worth in total. With those, hundreds and possibly upward of 1,000 air-launched cruise missiles might be available. One aspect of the war wasn't touched upon yet, though: paramilitary forces. But there is no real way to count the various militia-like organizations. Texas might likely have more of those than California, but proper census of those isn't available. On paper, both states have laws which state that every able-bodied male, age 18 to 45, is part of an official militia force, if need be. Actual training or organization does not exist for the most part. California even explicitly bans some paramilitary training, like for guerrilla warfare. Of course, actually enforcing those laws is another matter. One could try to count the guns in each state, but that too would be based only on estimates. US laws prohibit clear and publicly available gun owner registries. Registering a gun in the US is not obligatory, so the great majority of personal firearms in the US are not registered. Various studies estimate anywhere from 260 to 390 million privately owned guns in the US, so the actual figures are over an order of magnitude higher than the registered gun figures. One recent study suggests some...
Yeah, so that's, I mean, I guess that's kind of common knowledge for people from the United States, but yes, there are technically more guns than people that exist in the United States. And also, I mean, just based on conversations that I've had with people, it does sound like Texas just naturally has a lot more guns in its state. I want to say the gun culture is a lot bigger in Texas, and people are just, I guess, more willing to own and purchase not just one but multiple firearms. That's not to say that, like, you know, the whole political stereotypes aside, like, oh, California is super democratic and Texas is very Republican, so all Californians hate guns. Like, no, like, I personally have met quite a few people from California, and you know, a lot of them own guns as well. But for me, it's safe to assume that Texas just has more guns. So
20 million privately owned firearms in California. Similar studies for Texas are not available, but various polls do suggest the overall gun tally is higher, despite 10 million fewer residents. Using similar ratios, Texas might have anywhere from 25 to possibly over 40 million firearms. Of course, having privately owned guns and having actual groups of people with guns, organized in even remotely effective fighting units, are completely different things.
Very true.
Handguns would be next to useless in a war. Various rifles are a bit more useful, but training would be key. Centralized command and organization of those additional mobilized militias would be crucial, as well as their military experience. Texas might have a slight edge there, despite California having over 30% greater population when it comes to actual military enlistment rates for two states. For years now, Texas has been trailing California only by a few percent. Furthermore, as we said in the beginning, the military in California is heavily skewed towards the Navy and to some extent the non-ground troop Marine Corps units.
That's crazy. Think about that. Like, Texas has, like was mentioned, 10 million less people, yet it only trails by very little. That's how you can just tell, you know, the different attitudes of the state.
So the actual number of ex-military personnel with significant ground combat experience is likely to favor Texas to a small degree. But even so, if one manages to talk 5 or 10% of the population into going to war, both states would be left with a few million of mostly poorly equipped ground troops, with maybe up to 10% of those having actual military experience. Such mobilized forces would be huge, but not trained nor equipped for anything more than human wave tactics, which would be ludicrous. Or holding defensive positions in the back, basically doing light patrol duties. It would all really be another factor to the defensive nature of the whole conflict, where neither side would have enough force to actually go into the other state and conquer any meaningful piece of land. Texas would suffer too many casualties just trying to reach California, while California might be low on equipped and trained infantry and facing scores of paramilitary units in urban environments in Texas. That being said, the greater situational awareness, air power edge and blockade of the Texan coastline would result in more destruction of important Texan assets and somewhat greater Texan casualties overall. So this particular unrealistic scenario might ultimately have a winner, sort of. Of course, in the real world, none of this could ever transpire. The two US states could fight each other only if the US as a whole ceases to function. Such a fight would then have to be a part of some hypothetical distant future war, possibly in the wake of a larger geopolitical event, and probably devoid of much of the current US military influence. Before we go, a little bit more about Conflict of Nations. It's free to play, it's real time, it's your strategy versus the brains of real players online. There are so many options, it might take you weeks to complete one game. The setup is early 21st century and the game features modern-day weapon systems. Research the units and tech, pick and choose your strategies, and nuke your opponents, if you will. Wouldn't want to be Fresno right now.
Just nuke them.
Conflict of Nations will have you balancing diplomacy, so choose your allies carefully. You want to pick your attack routes with care and precisely time the arrival of your forces to surround the enemy. Conquer the world or rule North America, depending on the game mode. Battlefield USA mode will be exclusive to Binkov viewers for a while. So click on the link below to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. Choose your country and fight your way to victory.
Wow,
And
that was
remember,
good.
Binkov may talk about hypothetical wars, but only real peace can bring us all together.
I remember that little line. That's a very nice line. I like that he says that at the end. Because some of his videos probably piss off a lot of people, especially like when it's two countries and then one of them wins, and like you'd probably just have a bunch of like angry people from the losing country just in the comments, like just berating people. Oh god. Yeah, I know that happens. So that was Texas versus California in Binkov Battlegrounds, and it pretty much went the way I thought. Like I said, 10 million more people, a much bigger economy. That does make a big difference in war scenarios. It just does. More bodies just equals just more power overall. And I also think that Texas's military, I think they would know that, hey, we have more people that have more guns in our population. And not just like handguns, but like, you know, actual rifles. So I think it would probably be in their best interest to like start up those militia programs as soon as possible and get people ready, because they know that they're going to face a state that has a much larger population and economy. So, I mean, those are my thoughts. Overall, though, something like this happening would be outrageous. I mean, I want to say that it'll never happen, but technically it kind of already happened with the whole Civil War thing. I mean, not the two states directly, but you know what I mean. But hey, it's a hypothetical scenario, so it is what it is. Anyway, that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. As always, please keep giving me suggestions in the comments below on what to react to next or what to play next. And I will see you all in the next video. Peace out, guys.